Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Caroline Herteau, and I currently serve as project manager for Albion Reinvestment Corporation and the host of the Brick by Brick conversation series. And today you are joining us for our second of 6 conversations. Today's topic is focused on the role of anchor institutions and how they can support community revitalization in small communities, large communities, and specifically here in Albion. So as a reminder for today's conversation, everyone is going to remain on mute except our speakers so that we are able to hear them without background noise. During our Q&A session in the second half of the conversation, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. But for our speakers to be able to be heard, please go ahead and remain on mute. So I will start the conversation by introducing our speakers. First, we will hear from Dustin McClellan. He currently serves as founder and CEO of the Pontiac Community Foundation. We are waiting for our representative from Albion College to join us, but we are expecting Raymond Barclay, Chief Planning Officer. And as I said his name, here he comes. Raymond Barclay is the Chief Planning Officer at Albion College and one of Albion's newest residents. And then we will hear from Shane Williamson, who is an Albion native and currently serves as Acting Director of the Albion Community Foundation. Each of our speakers will get about 5 minutes to provide comment about the role of anchor institutions, their institutions specifically, about community revitalization, how they play that role, how they see themselves as anchors. We have a few unique perspectives in that we're hearing from 2 nonprofit foundations and then also a university. Anchor institutions are often seen as healthcare, education, and large business, but our speakers today bring a unique perspective from the nonprofit side of things and also the higher education realm. So I will let Dustin go ahead and kick it off, and I hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Caroline. It is great to be with all of you and have a few minutes to share. And I just believe that these kinds of conversations are what's essential for our communities to be revitalized. And I'll give you a little bit of background on the Pontiac Community Foundation, and then we can begin the conversation more formally. But I had the privilege of founding the Pontiac Community Foundation just 3 years ago. As a lifelong Pontiac resident, I've seen many challenges that a community like ours, particularly going through times of economic downturn, has faced. And so seeing the persistent challenges, looked for a mechanism to help make change in the community. And Pontiac had not had a community foundation and sought out to begin that. We're dedicated to building a brighter future for Pontiac through philanthropy, leadership, and collaboration. Our vision is to see Pontiac as the premier place to live, work, and play. And we traditionally have led a little bit different role than traditional community foundations. We are at times a funder, a fiduciary, a convener, but oftentimes, first and foremost, we are a thought partner and leader with our community, with the city, with other organizations. And so our work is centered on economic development, community development, civic leadership, racial equity, and quality of life initiatives. For us, we really see as an anchor institution, we've really got to ask 4 questions constantly in our community. For us, number one, it's what initiatives programs need to be launched in our community to help bridge gaps that are there. We recently launched the Center for Pontiac Entrepreneurship, convened a number of organizations that were working in that space, but were not working together collaboratively, and said, how can we together move forward entrepreneurship in our city? The second question is, who can we convene? Who are the leaders? What are the groups of leaders that need to come together to work collaboratively systematically bring together strategic plans to move the community forward. Who can we fund? That's our role as a foundation. That's important, but also the fourth question, who can we add capacity to? And capacity isn't always funding. Sometimes it's staff, people resources, it's other resources that are available in the community. And so in Pontiac, the convener role is so important because people historically have not worked together. And we've had challenges when it comes to municipal government. The municipal government hasn't played that role as we would really hope for them to be that role. And so we play that role, whether it's transportation, economic development, community development, so many spaces. We're often called upon to bring people together, to make plans, to help make change. And we often talk about 4 pillars of institutional support that are needed for vibrant communities. And these are the 4 anchors that we constantly hope that we're able to develop and move the needle on in Pontiac. Number 1, it's strong business sector. That is from the sole proprietors to the budding entrepreneurs on Main Street to those mainstay corporations that are going to provide workforce and be around. You need a strong business sector that has every single one of those. Number 2 is education. And for us, when we talk about education, we talk about our local school system. The strength of that is so important. And we see that in housing, we see that in workforce development. We see that so many different ways how that's important. Thirdly, again, what we would call, as Caroline alluded to, those traditional institutions. Universities, hospitals. We've been privileged to have Oakland University next door for many years, 2 large hospitals in our city. And so there's a lot to be gained from them in natural workforce development. And then finally, philanthropy, strategic investment in our community. And sometimes that is purely philanthropic through nonprofit giving to those community efforts, but also looking at who are those strategic investors that we're going to bring into our community, and how can we make sure that they have all the resources they need to help move our community forward. And so we're excited about the work we're doing in Pontiac. I know that a lot of the challenges we faced are similar to the ones that Albion has faced, and I was privileged to take a tour of the city prior to the pandemic and get to know the things that are happening there. And so this is a little bit of how we see our anchor role, and we're making change in Pontiac.
Thank you, Dustin. That was a great overview. And you touched on a few things that I'm going to ask during our moderated questions. So excited for that. So I'll ask Dr. Raymond Barclay to speak next on his role as Chief Planning Officer at Albion College, and the role that Albion College sees as higher education institutions play as anchor institutions in communities.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be invited to be here. I'm traveling, but I didn't want to miss this, and so I'm really glad to have an opportunity to talk to the community today. So my role as Chief Planning Officer, I have a portfolio that includes things related to facilities, capital planning. I have some roles, key roles in academic planning in partnership with the provost. And I also have key partnership roles with enrollment planning and financial planning. So I touch a lot of different parts of the institution. IT, information technology also falls under my portfolio. I have about 25 years in higher ed related fields, as well as private sector experience and prior military. And I've worked with very large system schools, as well as small private colleges over my career. I think, as I think about the community and the particular role of the campus, I'm still learning. I'm so new to the community. And so I've been on a bit of a listening tour. I'm starting to serve on board, starting to understand what's happening, under the hood, as a matter of speaking, within the community, and some of the some of the interests and experiences of the community with the campus over the years. And so I'm sort of collecting that information and trying to create a context by which planning needs to happen in partnerships with the community. And so that I'm still very much in a new phase there. So I have to say that out of the gate. So what I'd probably like to do is sort of step back a little bit and say, campuses generally of the type that Albion is, Albion College, liberal arts campuses, they've tended over the last several years to primarily function out of a charity and engagement model. And so what that means is that they may interact with their communities, their local communities, but it's primarily in a service model. And it's not necessarily been in the context of a place-based model whereby you're trying to help develop capacity. And so whereas larger Research One institutions of a type like Michigan State or University of Michigan, they tend to get involved in the community in charity and engagement work, but they're also involved as an anchor institution through their healthcare vehicles and technology transfer vehicles. So they have much greater capacity to get engaged in workforce development and industry development. And so the place-based model for smaller liberal arts schools, whereby they're moving to a capacity building model and thinking more strongly about social equity, is really a pretty new thing. And in fact, this campus is probably deeper in those conversations and thinking harder about that than a lot of liberal arts campuses are nationally. Liberal arts campuses have tended to be those campuses that were sort of on the hill, behind a fence or wall, would come out when they would do service with or for the community, maybe serve on community boards, but not really partners in the development of the infrastructure and the capacity. And so that's starting to change. Is very much the vision of I think, the current administration, is how can we be a better partner in a sustained manner rather than ad hoc and one-off. And so that really is changing the mindset as a delivery model from one of the teacher, scholar, to a partner and collaborator in the context of place-based education. And so that's where you have to take more seriously what's the local heritage, the culture, the landscape, the opportunities and the experiences of the community that you're situated within, versus a model that recruited students from primarily outside the community and brought them in and then delivered their educational model to those students. And those students then would go into the community and deliver services and support. So it's a very different model, it's a very different collaborative frame. And so an institution like this isn't practice. So it's a new sort of approach. And so as we talk more about the things that we're engaged in, they're really manifestations of a commitment to being a nonprofit that allows for more of that community collaborative frame and capacity building frame. And that's messier, it's harder, but what happens as a result of that work is much more meaningful oftentimes for the community. And I'm not trying to diminish charity or the service models, those are very important, but it's an extension beyond that in terms of the capacity building that really is sustained beyond the personalities that are situated within any given organization, right? Because people come and go. So what the difference is in an anchor frame is that you set up structures that it doesn't matter who the personality is, those relationships are important, but those initiatives continue beyond the personalities that maybe help to get them started. And that's why it's an anchor, right? Versus one-off or ad hoc. So I hope that gives a sense about both the context that this liberal arts school sits within, but also the rationale by which we're trying to move initiatives forward as partners.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. Appreciate that. And now we'll hear from Shane Williamson, Acting Director of the Albion Community Foundation.
Good afternoon. I'm Shane Williamson. I am the Acting Executive Director of the Albion Community Foundation. I have served in that role since last May in the midst of a pandemic, and have come on board, and I'm very thankful to the Board of Trustees for asking me to serve. and help lead the organization through these interesting times. The Albion Community Foundation was born before 1968, but we officially became the Albion Community Foundation in 1968, and we have functioned much more like a traditional community foundation that you find around Michigan. Community foundations are incredibly popular in Michigan. Kellogg Foundation had a large hand in making sure that community foundations were started all over the state. Interestingly, our four main places that we support in the community right now, we're in the middle of a 5-year strategic plan. We're in the dead middle of it. Our youth and education, workforce development, leadership development, and community vitality. And one of the things that, if you are a longtime Albion resident, you will note that the Community Foundation has kind of moved around within the community. And throughout its history, the Community Foundation has really jumped between bringing money and resources to build endowment and doing special projects. And basically every time the Community Foundation's moved in Albion, there's been a new special project that has come online. So the Bohm Theater was a product of hard work by so many people in the community, but led by the Community Foundation. And then our new building out by Precinct 1 was a way in which the Board of Trustees has said we need to start focusing on communities that are generally underrepresented and underserved here in Albion. And so we have put ourselves out there, and we have started to support projects in zones that have seen less love throughout the years in Albion. And part of that has been a journey that our board has taken, and the leadership of the Community Foundation has taken through equity and diversity, and making sure that our mission aligns with the entirety of the community. One of the things that we think as an anchor institution, because we don't have the most money of any institution in the county or in the city, one of the things we know that we're really good at the Community Foundation is holding relationships. People see the Community Foundation. The reason we are seen as an anchor is because we have a trust relationship built on trust with almost all stakeholders throughout the community. And so people know that when the Community Foundation is doing something, it's generally high integrity, important projects supported by a wide swath of the community. And that has been our strength, and it will be our strength moving forward as we grow. One of the things about Albion's geography is that, we're not in Jackson, but we're not over by Battle Creek. And so we tend to be in a philanthropic gray zone as community foundations go. Interestingly enough, just down the road is the Battle Creek Community Foundation, top 5 in the state, and Albion Community Foundation is bottom 5 based on assets. I mean, that doesn't mean performance, it just means money in the bank. And so those types of disparities have forced the Board of Trustees and the Community Foundation to be incredibly nimble with how we build our relationships and how we spend our resources. We tend to think that $1 is just as important as $5,000, $10,000, and $15,000. And we have been priding ourselves on making sure that every investment we make on behalf of the community with this, with our endowment, with our resources, makes a difference for as many people as it possibly can. So that's kind of where I want to leave it for the Albion Community Foundation. A long history of doing really good work here in the community and being supported by everyone. I can't remember being part of an organization where everyone just loves it like this, like in Albion. So it's quite exciting to see the support of the community around the foundation. So thank you.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you to our 3 speakers. So I'm going to kick off with a few moderated questions, and then any of our participants, if you have a question and want to drop it in the chat for me to ask, I'm happy to do that, or feel free to unmute yourself in a few minutes and ask your burning questions. But I wanted to start with, I think we heard from all 3 of our speakers about this idea of convening, bringing people to a table from varying sectors and having those sometimes challenging conversations. And I tend to think about the Albion Community Foundation as that safe place that we can have really challenging conversations because it's a somewhat neutral zone. And so I'd love your commentary on how you can be a convener, but that doesn't mean that you have to be the out front leader of a particular project. Just thinking that there's space for a number of organizations in all of our communities to lead projects, but that doesn't mean that our anchor institutions can't also be at the table. So I'm just interested in if you have thoughts around convening a conversation or convening on a project, but also stepping aside and letting another organization that may have that area expertise lead the way.
I can make a quick comment on that to kick us off, if that's all right, Carolyn. So when I first got here, I got a call from Michael McClellan up in Battle Creek, and it was a connection with a local representative's office. And he asked if I could engage him around the question of broadband. COVID really made clear in the county and region, and in Battle Creek in particular, his experience that the broadband issue, FCC data is problematic. We realize how bad our infrastructure is in the county really around this topic. And he asked if I could connect with him and help to facilitate getting a study off the ground, along with a few other organizations. And so what we've done is help to commission that study and help to support it financially, and help to add to that conversation. And there will be, from what I understand, a county-wide task force formed around that. But I think that's a good example where sometimes quietly or as a partner helping to support an issue that's in the interest of the entire region and key anchor stakeholders as well, allows us to get something moving, but really just being a participant and a quiet participant in that process allows for something to move forward that can bring funding into the community and not necessarily be viewed as in the self-interest of the given anchor institution. So I think sometimes it's good just to help support, be a quiet a partner, be a thought partner, or help convene a small group to help get something kicked off, and then really step aside, and that's a good example. Oftentimes campuses in particular that are tight for dollars have to justify every dollar spent. And sometimes that's mistaken for needing to stick our chests out and take credit for it, when really it's just trying to justify to the stakeholders why we spent those dollars. And then other times it's gratuitous, that campus may indeed be trying to hog the limelight on that. And so there's different perceptions around why those things happen, but I think campuses have a lot of influence. They have a lot of stakeholders, and they're typically, if they're a place-based organization, have a fairly strong financial position. And if they can, they should be benefactors to those kind of initiatives. And the quieter sometimes the better.
So I was actually going to add, if I could, what's great about the Community Foundation here in Albion is that because of our size, we are not the experts in most matters. So one of the things I think of right now is we took on a grant from the county to support senior housing in Albion. This has been a 20+ year conversation in the community by so many people. You know, we need to, we're bleeding our senior and older adult population to other communities. We need to keep them here. Not only are they treasures to our community, but they are an economic impact to our community, and having them stay here for as long as possible and live in their community is important. And so what we did at the foundation is we wrote this grant, but then we said, we're not the ones in charge of it. And we hired 2 local consultants. We partnered with Albion College, and we put together a senior housing commission. And so while the Albion Community Foundation helped obtain a resource to help get something off the ground, we've completely stepped aside and let this commission, who has been convening a meeting of local leaders and folks who care about the project, carry the work forward. And so our strength in this is that as an anchor institution is that we can help support and lift behind the scenes and do the kind of swimming underwater like a duck, everything looks like it's great, and we can help support behind the scenes. But it's really to our advantage that other people carry this work forward, because that's how we create inclusion and an environment where people feel like their voices are heard and their opinions are taken seriously. And at the end of the day, when the product is finished, or when we're putting a shovel in the ground for new senior housing, wherever that's going to be, everyone at the end of the day knew they had a stake in that, and they had a say. And it wasn't the community foundation that needed to take the credit for it. It was this great group of people who made it happen. So I think our strength at the foundation in helping projects is to be behind the scenes and help bolster up others in their quest to make things better in the community.
I'll just add very briefly, I echo the sentiments of both the gentlemen that spoke. We're not the experts as a community foundation, the people on the ground are. But, I think in our approach with our work and any of the initiatives, anything that we start, we always want to have partners alongside of us. And when we have partners alongside of us, we feel like that naturally takes that pressure off, or the tension off of us, and creates that space for us to be the neutral convener.
Thank you for those comments. I keep thinking about communities are often acting fast and slow. You have individuals who are used to working at a fast pace, whether they're in a for-profit business and things just move a bit faster, or they're in a more nimble organization. And then you get into the anchor institutions or institutions like a community foundation that might have a few more, you can still be nimble, but there's a few more hoops, and sort of balancing that working fast and slow. And so I'm interested in hearing how you, as leaders of those anchor institutions, help collaboration happen, even though it's really messy and people don't always want to work at the same pace. I'm guilty of it and saying, why can't we just move faster? But I recognize that that's not always feasible. But sometimes I think we can move it at a slightly faster clip if we challenge ourselves to. So I'm interested from an anchor institution perspective, knowing that you're coming from organizations that are a bit larger or have a few more hoops. How can you either slow people down or encourage them to speed up in whatever the project might be?
Yeah, I can jump off on that one. As an organization, our board just approved our 3-year strategic plan, and we have dubbed it an agile strategic plan. We are leaving space for us to, especially coming out of a pandemic, right, to be flexible to the needs of our community that are ever so changing. And I think that part of our job as an anchor institution is to bring people along, even if they at times come kicking and screaming. I'll give you a perfect example. If you're familiar with, Pontiac, Metro Detroit, we've got the Woodward M1, Woodward Dream Cruise, Woodward ends in Pontiac. The Woodward Loop has siphoned off downtown Pontiac for years, and MDOT has set aside multiple $1 million to help eradicate that issue and turn Woodward into a two-way street again. And it required some quick decision making, and the players didn't want to come to the table. And so folks are reaching out to us saying, hey, can you move people along? And so it's one of those decisions where, okay, either you come along, or we're going to lose the opportunity to make this change and lose the dollars that MDOT's not going to give unless the city gets their act together. So we have the ability to move those needles because we've got the relationships and the partnerships, and I think it's essential for anchor institutions to leverage and I hate to say this, but leverage that power, that weight, that relational equity that they have to move the needle when it's necessary.
Yeah, Dustin could have stole the words out of my mouth. I mean, we are the kind of relationship managers of the community, especially when it comes to philanthropy and lining up with priorities of municipalities or local interest, right? So, you can have a donor who's really excited to do this project, but you got, as a community foundation, we have to be the people to manage the donor expectation with the quickness with which municipal government or other entities might be working. And that's always a balance. The good news is that generally your donors and philanthropists are understanding. They also are the ones who will light a fire to try to move it quicker. So we appreciate that. And then I think the other piece that community foundations are really finding themselves dealing with now as an anchor institution is that philanthropy is entering a kind of a new age. We've started in our heading towards the middle of one of the greatest generational wealth transfers in the history of the United States, as people age and wealth is then passed on to the next generation. And your Gen Xers are coming up on money and resources that they never had before, or they're moving on with the family business or the work that they've done, but their type of giving is different than before. So previously it was, what do you need? You need to feed people, here's money. Do you need money for this new park? Here's money. And now we're dealing with donors and philanthropists who are saying, we're drilling down in the details and saying, I want to help make it this way. And there's a whole new model for how we handle donors, which is creating another internal barrier to moving projects along quickly. It can be done, and there are places that are moving very fast. I would say Albion as a city is moving faster than it ever has in previous years when it comes to what's going on in the community and the revitalization. Part of that is strong networks and relationships, not only with the Community Foundation, but with the Reinvestment Corporation, the EDC. There's a lot of groups that have found some synergy together over the last several years, which has created the movement that we have. But we're still going to run into those roadblocks that slow us down, or stumbling blocks where we have to reorganize and figure out what's next.
I think COVID exposed what was already there in terms of a crisis of agility and also some fiscal crises and institutions that have an endowment under a certain size that are more enrollment driven, a school like Albion. So some of the exigency in terms of fiscal and programmatic of the last few years, in particular in response to the COVID crisis, has helped to accelerate new planning models, agile practices, as Dustin noted, that are getting adopted in higher ed. So it's sort of, sometimes you can turn a crisis into an opportunity, and that has helped to bring about more expediency in governance and in decision making, which I think has been healthy for the institutions, even though maybe the reason for that, obviously the COVID crisis wasn't healthy for anyone. But as a result of that experience, I think these institutions, healthcare and higher ed, are a lot alike. And I think they've both have kind of have matured as a result of the crisis that faced them over the last 2 years. And I think the other thing, the differences between this organization and Shane and Dustin's are, we have a vested interest in the community from a vantage of infrastructure, right? Shane's organization or Dustin's, they don't have streets in their footprint, right? And so I think one of the things that helps in terms of helping to move decisioning forward is when we can find in a space of collaboration, partnerships that are mutually beneficial. And that takes negotiation and consistency in negotiation. And the partners in that negotiation have to sort of feel like they're getting what they need out of that partnership. But when those things happen and that collaboration happens, it allows a behemoth organization like a higher ed organization or a healthcare organization, which typically are viewed as those traditional anchor institutions, it allows them to move more effectively, right? Because we're responsive to a board and we have a certain population we serve, whether it's patients or students. And so we have to justify, we're not a charity organization in the sense of we're not solely existent to run programs or to provide incentives for other institutions. We do some of that, but our primary goal in the case of college education is to educate students. And so we have to align some of those interests. The unfortunate thing I think that happens, we don't always do a good job in higher education of making transparent what the rationale is for our decisions or why we need to make certain decisions. And it comes across as gratuitous or self-interested. I think the more we're able to communicate the why and bring folks along in that conversation, it helps us be more expedient in the decision making. It allows us to invest in such a way that's more expedient. And it also allows other folks to see and to understand why we can only go so far maybe on a project or in some collaborative effort because of those sort of different dynamics than you might find in a philanthropic organization like the other two participants are part of. So.
Yeah, Ray spoke to transparency, and I think that's something that we're all working towards consistently, and sort of understanding that balance between things we can share right now, versus and not wanting to, for lack of a better phrase, get hopes up, because sometimes plans do change. The positive intent is still there, and the end goal may be the same, but how we get to that end goal might be path A or path C. And sometimes it's hard for community like Albion that's seen a lot of change and coming and going and moving pieces, to hear one plan and then get really excited about that plan. And then a couple months later, well, that's not the plan anymore. And it's sort of like, but how did we get from, yes, this is the plan, to that's definitely not the plan anymore? So balancing that transparency and creating understanding with partners at the table and with the community about plans do change, but the intention and the goal is still the same. So I'm going to open it up now. If we have individuals on the call who would like to ask a question, please feel free to unmute yourself. Please introduce yourself if you're from Albion or if you're joining us from another community, and feel free to ask any questions. I've got a few more, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
Hi, this is Virgie Ammerman. I am from Albion originally. My family still lives in Albion. I'm currently in Detroit, but I have a question about how do anchor institutions get a really good feel for what a broad spectrum of community members want. So I know that sometimes we believe we know what a community needs because we see a model or we know what works. But it would seem to me that getting really strong buy-in across a large group of people is really critical to success. What is the best way that you've used in the past to get just that really broad understanding of what community members might want?
If I could lead off of this one, because I know that every foundation executive director says this, but I think I actually have the best board of trustees. But one of the things that has made the Community Foundation so strong in Albion is that it has built a board of trustees that represent varying parts of the community. So, we don't just have the college representation or the business representation or, only schools. We have a wide array of folks on the trustees, on the board of trustees that do represent varying parts of the community that help drive our communication efforts deep into parts of the community that generally are hard to reach or have been traditionally hard to reach. And so we've found that when you engage at the board level with strong board members and with strong volunteer leaders within your organization, that you do get the input, and some of it you don't like, but you get it. You need the input that you don't like more than any of the other input, and that's been really helpful. So I think from the Albion Community Foundation standpoint, it's been our board of trustees and it's been our engagement with local organizations and social groups. Is how we, in those informal networks and relationships, that have really helped keep us out of trouble when it comes to decision making in the community and building that consensus around the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I would say that even as a lifelong resident of our community and still having family in the community, knowing the issues that are there, I can't really understand engage the community if I don't ask. And that doesn't mean that I always have to ask directly, or that we even necessarily have to, have a forum to ask. But, it's my job to have tentacles into the city. I need to be able to pick up a phone and call the school board and call the council and call the mayor and call the leading businesses, but also have different tiers. It's not just those key leaders, it's different tiers in the community. It's block captains, and it's, all those different, it's pastors, it's all those different stakeholders, so that I can make sure I'm hearing, they're listening to their people and also feeding that information back and informing us. And so it takes strategy and longevity to be able to do that on a dime. But once you do build out those relationships and that infrastructure, you can hear from the community fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think the relationships are key, right? A lot of the current campus and this particular anchor institution are new, so we've got some listening work to do, and some I found, I guess, because of years working in community work, that some just rolling up your sleeves with folks engenders trust and partnership, and then allows for access. And, then people sort of see an authenticity, and actually that you can do something, that you can deliver, right? And so campuses have, this campus is not unique. I've heard some comments about lack of delivery on some things over the years, and that would not make this particular campus unique. That's endemic to higher education. And so I think, delivering even on the small stuff that's important, that the campus might find small, but is really important to folks that experience that particular issue daily. I think the other thing is governance with teeth. A lot of times these token advisory boards get built at campuses. They're garbage. It's a couple folks, and there's not really meaningful input. It has no teeth. So really important governance structures with teeth, where the advisory board really has influence on the organization, and really I'm not talking about a board of trustees, I'm talking about a community advisory board that's potentially regional, actually, in particular, that allows lots of key voices in at different levels of the community. And so you're not held hostage to any one voice, community or otherwise. And I think that's really key. And I think the third thing is, I cut my teeth in project management and architectural work. And strategic planning is linear, where design work is iterative. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is infuse charrette practices into the strategic planning structures of the institution, because charrettes are co-constructive. And I think the more we co-construct solutions, just like a design project, the better. And so what's interesting is charrettes are becoming more of a mechanism in communities, not just to figure out how to build that new building over there, but really for community collaboration. And they can be very powerful. And in fact, this particular community just up the road in Lansing has the National Charrette Institute located at Michigan State in their extension office through public planning office. So I think those kind of introductions of new strategies for facilitative co-constructive problem solving, that's authentic. It's not this sort of linear process that leads to this document that gets set on a shelf, but really you've prototyped and solved some issue. Those three things for me are the ways that the campuses then become much more authentic in the engagement, and community partners feel like, wow, we're delivering on stuff, we're getting stuff done together, versus let's meet and tell me what the problems are, and we'll meet once or twice a year and somehow sort of pretend like we're solving something. higher ed has to change that. And that's just not this campus and this community, that's higher ed period, really. It's endemic in the higher ed sector. So,
yeah, I love that point. And I think it's not just at the higher ed level. I think we could all come up with examples of times we've sat, been invited to a conversation and felt like, are they really going to take what I am saying to heart? Or is this a check on the checklist of things that we should do because it's the right thing to do? And I think, like you said, it's building trust in our community, that when we ask you to the table, we're listening, and listening well before we make a decision, so that we are able to bring that insight for those who are laying their head on the pillow in the community every single night, raising their families, taking care of loved ones, and driving and walking our streets every day. Those are the individuals that can be the real windows into our neighborhoods, and into our full communities. I've got a question that might shift the conversation just slightly, but I think what I heard from all three of our speakers in their introduction was this partly a focus on leadership development. And as a young, I would categorize myself as a young leader in the Albion community, and I see many of those here on this call as well. And I also see some of our longtime leaders in the community on this call. How do you support young leaders as they're rising through the ranks, and sort of cutting their teeth on some of these new projects, or wanting to get involved, understanding what board service means, whether it's at the Community Foundation, or here in Albion, it's the Children's Museum or the BOEM, or you name it, we have a board for it here in town, it seems like. So how are your organizations, how can they support young leaders in building the next generation of individuals who are going to move these projects forward, and really be the heartbeat of our communities for the next 10, 15, 20 years?
So at the Albion Community Foundation, we're in the middle of our 5-year strategic plan. And one of the areas where we have not made as much progress as I think we would like is in the area of leadership development and developing our young local leaders. I think in Albion, there's been this history of, if we put a young person on a board, that's helping them, or that's giving them experience. And what they really need is that mentoring and that training and that kind of education that goes along with being on a board and serving in those roles, and being a high-level leader in the community. So one of the things I know that our board is looking at, and the Albion Community Foundation is looking at, is how do we bring some type of leadership programming to the community to help bolster up some of the folks we know who are doing such good work. There's a lot of young people of color in Albion who are entrepreneurs, who are working with the EDC to get a little bit of support for their business. But we also know that in order for businesses to be successful, there needs to be some leadership development for them as well. And there are conversations ongoing about how can we help use and deploy our resources to encourage more leadership development in the community. I mean, like a Leadership Detroit or a Leadership Kalamazoo, you can think of some of the bigger cities in Michigan who have these programs that have been built for them to help do just exactly what Caroline is asking about, and that's develop the next generation of leaders in that community. And so on a smaller level here locally, it seems like the timing might be right for some collaboration between the anchor institutions here in Albion and businesses to help deploy some sort of leadership development program. So so while that's not an area we're experts at the Community Foundation, we definitely are looking to deploy resources to support that in the community.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And just from personal experience, I served 8 years as director of nonprofit in town that's working on leadership development in the community. And I was a product of that program as a young person from 7 years old through high school. And so, you know, fast forward all these years now, I'm leading the community foundation. So it works. There's value to it, but we have to be intentional about finding programs and initiatives to build these leaders, to give them real opportunities, not just filler seats or youth advisory committees or whatever, real opportunities to lead and to grow. And so similarly, we've provided some scholarships to Leadership Oakland to help develop leaders. We're working with a group of folks now to develop a leadership program that'll be a partnership model, particularly geared toward building governmental and elected leaders, because there's only one of our city council persons that is under the age of 65. And so we really have a crisis of leadership in our community. So you have to be extremely innovative. You're gonna have to try many things to see what works and what sticks and what kind of gathers this incoming generation. But it needs to be done, and communities must take a stab at it.
Yeah, Dustin's spot on. I started my career at the Bonner Foundation, the McClellan Bertram F. Bonner Foundation, and they were part of the early going-ons under Bush and Clinton for national service. So the Corporation for National Service came out of that. And I was the PI on the AmeriCorps Bonner Leaders Grant, which was an extension and a replication of the Bonner Scholars Grant, which is a program that is basically tries to cultivate. It was one of the first programs to really try to cultivate a national service model that was scaffolded across the undergraduate curriculum experience to allow for developmental outcomes, and then parlay that into national service or local service outcomes. And so it's truly a campus community student development model. And actually the president of Albion, as well as other folks on the senior administration team, have deep experience in those kind of models. And so it's a real kind of personal passion for many of us, and sort of why we're in the business is really the student leadership piece. And I think what we're trying to do at our campus right now is we've revised the employment model to be for students to have expectations that are developmentally appropriate, as well as our civic engagement structure that we're going to try to move out of the Ludington Center. And what that means really in English is, you might come in and be a direct service provider, right? You might go into the local homeless shelter and serve food to the folks there. And that's a really important character building, empathy building experience. But then what's the expectation from that? If you're a senior and still doing that and only doing that, have we failed? And so what are the mechanisms we put in place to move that person from doing or including direct service into project coordination? And then from project coordination into peer leadership and mentoring. And then from peer leadership and mentoring into social advocacy and political participation, and so on. And so we have to frame the mechanisms that allow the youth to kind of move through it. It just doesn't happen organically. It has to be really intentional. And I think the mistake in a lot of nonprofits, as well as educational institutions, is we don't help to configure the paths that allow for that to be more intentional. And so I was really proud of my work early in my career, and it really molded me in terms of helping to structure some of those frameworks and the outcomes in national service through City Year and AmeriCorps, and the capacity building that's happened because of those kind of models among the youth is amazing. And my view is if we could just replicate that more at a local level, we get the kind of outcomes Dustin was talking about, which is a heck of a lot more folks on council of different age ranges, more leadership in the community, not just charitable direct service from our students, and so on and so on. And then we're moving to a justice and an advocacy model, and not just a direct service model. And I think that's really important. So at any rate, you can probably tell I'm pretty passionate about that particular piece, but why else do this stuff, right? That's for me the real future and the vision. And so I think that's a great question, Carolyn. And I hope we can.
Yeah, we all.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
We all find our passion, and I'll let Cliff Harris have the last question, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. So go ahead, Cliff.
So my question is, in developing leadership, when you get, by the way, my name is Clifford Harris. I'm the head of Walk the Beat Albion and chair of the Bohm Theater. And I'm a professor at Albion College. So I do lots of student interns and put them to work in the Bohm and for Walk the Beat. And one of the things I'm curious about in developing leaders is the differing rates at which students can assume those positions. As I try to get students interested in event management or in the music business, depending on their own interests, it can take some time to really understand how to put together an event or how to put together a festival. So I had a very ambitious kid yesterday walk up and say, "Hey, I want to do a new festival in Albion in July." And I tried to be supportive, right? But you know, these kind of dreams, I don't want to dash those dreams. But on the other hand, you know, if the only thing you've ever organized is something small at your high school, and then you want to go over this thing, I'm trying to figure out how to step students up this ladder and take into account the different things that you need to know. So I guess what my question is, how do you adjust for the different rates and different knowledge gathering time between the desire to do something and the ability to do it well?
It's a tough question, Cliff.
It was too difficult with the last question. Yeah, I'll just pass on that one.
Well, I mean, Cliff, I think it's part of that. It's part of that framework. I mean, you do have certain students that are going to get to that point, or young leaders that are going to get to that point with or without our help. They're driven. They sort of know what they want, and you know, we can sort of help guide them along, and you know, but I think it's creating a support capacity with peers or colleagues of that student that allow for it to not be such a big task, and or allow for that scaffolding to happen, that development to happen in a framework or an employment or a volunteer framework that bring the student along to a point where they understand really the parameters and the expectations around that kind of an undertaking, and helps to sort of get them there. And so I think it's both building a capacity around that student, but also then helping to have a developmental roadmap that helps the student gain the competencies, the experience, and the opportunities to be able to develop into that kind of a role, to pull off that kind of a project outcome, you know. So,
no, I like that. The infrastructure is complicated, but there's a structure there that just seems complicated to get there.
One of the things that I think about when I think about young people, I think the same student actually came to city council on Monday night, and maybe during public comment said, "Hey, I want to do this new Albion festival," and the ambition and the excitement and the enthusiasm is there. So one of the things that I think about is I identify as that student. You know, 14 years ago, I was in that student's place. I was a loud kid who had a passion for doing something that I thought would help my community or help my campus. And thankfully, in my undergrad and in my diaspora of friends and people, I had folks who helped me get to that point, as Ray was describing, how we help students get to the point. So people helped guide me along. They said, "That's a great idea. Let's work through that." And they gave me the space to kind of learn and create and then scale back. Like, "Well, nope, you're not going to do Ozfest at Saginaw Valley this summer. That's not what we're doing. But you know what? I bet we could get that concert going in the fall for Welcome Weekend." And then they gave me the tools, and they trusted me to ask for help when I needed it. And it was more than just your professor. It was a whole team of people, and building that in the community is really hard. But whenever I deal with young people, and I got to tell you, it's so weird to refer to others as young people. I am not young anymore. But when I work with young people, I always think about that. I think so. If I have someone who comes to me and says they have a big idea at the foundation, I'm never going to say no. unless it's not in the mission, but I'm definitely going to help be that person that I had whenever possible to help guide me along. And I think we can build more of that in our community through some leadership development initiatives.
I know we're at time. I'll just say this: find somebody else to shadow that's successful and work alongside them, you know, during their event for a year, and take some notes and then emulate it.
Yeah, I think we could probably all point to that one person or organization in our life that said, "Come alongside me. I appreciate your enthusiasm. Let me tap into your enthusiasm to help this be successful, and you can also learn while you're doing whatever we're trying to accomplish as a group." It's that sort of learn trial by fire, and you want them to be successful, but also it's okay to fail too. It's just, can they fail gracefully and still learn through that experience as well. So I appreciate everyone's time today. Do any of our speakers have any last minute 15 seconds, 30 seconds thoughts about our conversation today to sort of wrap it up? And then I'll remind you about our date for our May conversation. Oh, Ray, you're on mute.
I just wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity to do this. And I do want to say that what's really cool about what's happening in the community is the challenges that I'm seeing immediately being taken on. I think Shane made the comment earlier that there's a nimbleness happening and an urgency that's actually that's exciting. And that he noted how that's changed some, and it's sort of refreshing. And I think, you know, just to the point that was made in the chat by Dr. O'Neill, is that we've got the faculty at Albion College recognizing exactly the needs that were just articulated around leadership development. And they've taken that on in the curriculum and passed a certificate program that actually is doing what folks were just asking to have done around the framework for developing competencies and skills that are applicable in the community. And so I think really exciting stuff's on the horizon for the community. You can sort of feel it. And that's why I'm here. And that's why I saw that on the wall. It's not hard to see. And so I'm excited to be a part of the community and be a part of the success I think that we'll have over the next few years. So thank you.
Thank you. And I will say today's conversation, these are big topics where we could talk about anchor institutions and their role, and whether it's philanthropic or money driven or time driven, self-serving or not. We could have this conversation all day long, but I hope that you all have learned something today, had a insightful moment, sort of an aha, and maybe you're seeing an organization in your community or in Albion slightly differently. And that's what the purpose of these conversations is to start thinking about these bricks that make our communities strong. That's why we're calling it Brick by Brick. And so thank you all for joining us today. Again, this is a monthly series. We're having 6 of these conversations, each focused on a different topic. Our next conversation will be on May 27th. I didn't want to get the date wrong. Same time, 4:30. We're going to test a hybrid model dependent on the state of COVID, because we know that you do want to gather safely but see each other, and we're all in that funny in between right now. So we hope to have a hybrid model in May, and our topic of conversation in May will be the role of small business and entrepreneurship in community revitalization. So thank you all for joining today. If you had a great time, come back and share with a friend and join us in May. So everyone have a great day.